The Valorian star cruiser hung dead in space, a monument to failed technology and shattered hopes. Its sleek hull, once a pristine reflection of the galaxy's most advanced engineering, now bore the scars of a catastrophic systems failure. Inside, Captain Thexnor of the Valorian Confederacy stood on the bridge, his four arms hanging limp at his sides as he stared at the cascade of error messages flooding the displays. "Status report," he said, though he already knew the answer would bring no comfort. Engineer Velthra, a crystalline whose translucent body flickered with stressed bioluminescence, consulted her station. "Main power core is completely offline, Captain. The quantum stabilizers have entered recursive failure mode. Every time we attempt to reinitialize them, they collapse the containment field within 0.3 seconds. Secondary systems are trying to compensate, but they're burning out faster than we can reroute." Thexnor's main eyes closed, while his auxiliary pair continued scanning the bridge. 53 souls aboard this vessel, representing 12 different species from across the Confederacy. They'd been on a routine diplomatic mission to the outer sectors when the power core suffered what should have been a minor fluctuation. But that fluctuation had triggered a chain reaction that their automated systems couldn't contain. Now they were stranded 3 days from the nearest Confederacy outpost, and their distress beacon was the only system still operating at full capacity. "How long until life support fails?" he asked. 72 hours, maybe 80 if we shut down all non-essential systems and reduce atmospheric recycling to minimum safe levels," Velthra replied. Her light dimmed further, a sign of her despair. Navigation Officer Kritik, an insectoid chitter whose compound eyes could process visual information across 17 different spectrums, clicked his mandibles together nervously. "I've been monitoring local space. There's a human freight hauler approximately 6 hours away at standard subluminal speeds. They've acknowledged our distress call." "Humans?" Thexnor's tone carried a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. What would a human vessel be doing this far out? "Trade route expansion, according to their transmission. They say they're carrying mining equipment to the new colonies in Sector 8. Kritik paused, his antennae twitching. "They also say they have mechanics aboard who can help." A moment of silence filled the bridge. The Valorian star represented the pinnacle of Confederacy engineering, built by species who had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. Humans had barely achieved faster-than-light capability 2 generations ago. Their technology was primitive by Confederacy standards, their ships crude assemblies of metal and combustion that seemed more likely to explode than explore. "What choice do we have?" said Dr. Nixara, the ship's medical officer and a member of the telepathic Mindari. Her mental voice resonated in everyone's consciousness, tinged with pragmatic resignation. "We either accept their help or wait to see if a Confederacy vessel can reach us before our air runs out." Thexnor's auxiliary eyes closed, then his main pair. He was responsible for every life aboard this ship. Pride had no place in a decision that weighed survival against technological superiority. "Kritik, send a response. Tell them we accept their assistance and transmit our exact coordinates. Velthra, prepare a complete technical breakdown of our system's failures for their review." "Preparing now, Captain," Velthra said, though her flickering light suggested skepticism. "Though I'm not certain how much of our technical documentation they'll be able to understand. Human engineering principles are quite different from our own." 6 hours passed with agonizing slowness. The crew worked to stabilize what systems they could, but it was like trying to bail out an ocean with a cup. For every problem they addressed, 2 more emerged. The ship's artificial intelligence had gone into protective shutdown, unable to process the contradictory data flooding its neural networks. Backup systems that should have been independent were failing in sympathy with the primary ones, as if the ship itself had lost the will to function. When the human vessel finally appeared on their sensors, Thexnor felt his heart sink a little further. The freight hauler looked exactly as primitive as he'd feared. Its hull was scarred and patched, its design boxy and inelegant. It moved through space with none of the grace of Confederacy vessels, its thrusters firing in irregular bursts that suggested manual control rather than computer-guided precision. The communication channel crackled to life. "Valorian Star, this is the freight hauler Rusty Bucket. We're moving into position alongside you, preparing to send over our mechanics team. Stand by." Fexnor exchanged glances with his bridge crew. The ship was actually named Rusty Bucket. The humans hadn't even tried for something dignified. 20 minutes later, Captain Fexnor stood in the main airlock, watching as the human mechanics cycled through. There were 3 of them, clad in bulky spacesuits that looked like they'd been assembled from spare parts. The lead human removed his helmet, revealing a weathered face topped with gray hair that stuck up in several directions. "Name's Tommy Chen," the human said, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. Fexnor gripped it awkwardly with his upper right arm. "This is Sarah Rodriguez and Jim Patterson. We're here to take a look at your ship." Tommy's eyes scanned the pristine corridor with its softly glowing walls and seamlessly integrated technology. He let out a low whistle. "Fancy place you got here. Lot fancier than the Bucket, that's for sure." "We appreciate you responding to our distress call," Fexnor said, trying to maintain diplomatic formality despite his doubts. "However, I must warn you that our systems are extremely advanced. I'm not certain that we'll understand them." Tommy's grin was disarming. "Yeah, we get that a lot. Look, Captain, I've been fixing ships for 40 years. Started with atmospheric shuttles back on Earth, worked my way up to deep space haulers. Sarah here's got a PhD in quantum mechanics, and Jim can rebuild a fusion reactor in his sleep. We might not use the same tech as you folks, but problems are problems. Something's broke, something's got to fix it. Let's go see what we're dealing with." Velthra met them in the main engineering bay, her translucent form practically gray with stress. The quantum power core dominated the center of the room, suspended in a containment field that flickered irregularly. Holographic displays surrounded it, showing cascading failures in languages and symbols the humans couldn't possibly understand. "The core suffered a quantum decoherence event," Velthra explained, her voice translated through the universal communication implants all Confederacy members carried. "The stabilizers that maintain quantum entanglement failed, and now the core can't maintain a stable energy state. Every reset attempt results in immediate field collapse. We've tried 17 different initialization sequences, all approved protocols, and none have worked." Sarah stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the core. "Can you show us the energy signature patterns during the failure sequence?" Velthra manipulated the controls, and a 3-dimensional graph appeared in the air. It showed a complex waveform that spiked and collapsed in regular intervals. Sarah studied it for a long moment, then turned to Tommy and Jim. "It's a resonance cascade," she said. "The stabilizers aren't failing because they're broken. They're failing because they're fighting each other." "Fighting each other?" Velthra's light pulsed with confusion. "That's impossible. They're synchronized through the quantum field itself. They can't be out of phase." "Except they are." Sarah pointed to a section of the graph. "See this harmonic? And this one? They're 0.003 degrees out of sync. That's enough to create a feedback loop when you try to initialize." "But the synchronization is automatic," Velthra protested. "The system self-corrects for any phase variance. It's been doing so successfully for 8 years. "Sure, when the variance is natural," Jim said, running his hand along one of the containment pylons. "But what if something introduced an artificial offset, like a surge or a power spike that happened too fast for the automatic correction?" Velthra's light pulsed rapidly, her species equivalent of rapid thought. "The initial fluctuation, it was unusually sharp, lasted less than a microsecond. We thought it was just a normal variance spike, but if it created a phase offset that the autocorrection interpreted as the new baseline, then every time you try to restart, you're actually making it worse," Tommy finished. "The system thinks it's correcting, but it's really reinforcing the problem. Classic feedback loop. We see it in human systems all the time, just usually not with quantum whatsits. Thexnor had been listening from the edge of the engineering bay, trying to follow the technical discussion. So you're saying you understand the problem? Understanding's the easy part, Tommy said. Fixing it, that's where things get interesting. We need to manually reset the phase alignment of your stabilizers, but that means getting into the guts of this thing while it's live. Can't shut it down completely, or you lose all your stored energy and we can't restart it at all. That's why we haven't attempted manual recalibration, Velthra said. The quantum field inside the containment area would kill any biological being instantly. Even our automated drones can't survive the exposure long enough to make the adjustments. The field disrupts their circuitry. Tommy looked at Sarah and Jim. Something passed between them, some unspoken communication that Thexnor couldn't interpret. Then Tommy smiled. You got any spare parts lying around? Stuff you don't need? And I'm going to need to see what kind of tools you've got in this place. What happened over the next 4 hours defied everything Thexnor thought he knew about proper engineering. The humans requested items that seemed completely random. A spare atmospheric recycler, 3 induction coils from the backup navigation array, a gravity plate from the cargo bay, and something Velthra identified as a decorative light fixture from the officers' quarters. They also asked for Velthra's entire toolkit, which they examined with fascination before declaring most of it too sophisticated for what they needed. You don't have any hammers? Jim asked, sounding genuinely puzzled. Hammers? Velthra's light flickered in confusion. Like impact tools? Why would we need those? Everything is assembled at the molecular level. Right. Jim scratched his head. Okay, different approach. Sarah, thoughts? What the humans built in those 4 hours looked like an insult to engineering itself. They'd created a crude framework from the spare parts, connecting components in ways that made Velthra's light pulse with distress. They used the atmospheric recycler's magnetic coils to create what Tommy called a field damper, wiring it through the induction coils in a pattern that seemed to have no mathematical basis whatsoever. The gravity plate was repurposed into a shield generator that Jim insisted would protect whoever went into the containment field, even though its operating principles were completely incompatible with quantum field mechanics. This shouldn't work, Velthra said, her voice carrying a note of anguish as she watched them wire the decorative light fixture into the assembly. None of this should work. You're mixing incompatible technologies, creating power flows that violate basic energy conservation principles, and using equipment in ways it was never designed for. Yeah, Tommy agreed cheerfully. That's kind of our thing. See, the fancy thing about being less advanced is we don't always know what's supposed to be impossible. Sometimes that means we fail a lot, but sometimes he connected the final wire and the entire assembly hummed to life, creating a shimmering field around itself. Sometimes we stumble onto stuff that works anyway. He picked up the assembly, which was about the size of a human torso, and looked like it might fall apart at any moment. Right. Who wants to volunteer to test if this thing actually protects against quantum field radiation? I'll do it, Sarah said immediately. Like hell you will, Tommy shook his head. I'm the senior mechanic. If this goes wrong, it should be on me. And I'm the one with quantum mechanics training, Sarah countered. I'll know if something's going wrong before it kills me. They argued for another 3 minutes before Jim finally said, How about we test it first with a drone, like sensible people? That turned out to be the wise choice. The first test drone lasted 7 seconds in the containment field before its circuits fried. But it lasted 7 seconds, which was 6.5 seconds longer than Confederacy drones managed. Tommy made some adjustments, muttering about flux compensation and harmonic dampening, terms that seemed to have no relationship to actual quantum physics. The second drone lasted 30 seconds. The third made it to 2 minutes before failing. By the 5th iteration, the test drone operated inside the quantum field for 10 full minutes without any degradation. Okay, Tommy said, strapping the assembly to his chest. Let's do this before I remember I'm supposed to be too old for stupid risks. Captain Thexnor stepped forward. Mr. Chen, I must protest. This device has not been properly tested. The theoretical basis for its function is completely unclear. You could be killed. Tommy's grin was back. Captain, I appreciate the concern, but here's the thing. We came out here to help, and helping sometimes means taking chances. Besides, if we sit around until everything's perfectly safe and tested, your life support's going to run out, and we'll all have bigger problems. He checked the seals on his spacesuit one more time. Velthra, once I'm inside, you'll need to guide me through the recalibration. I won't be able to read your displays, so you'll have to tell me what to do in plain language. Can you do that? Velthra's light pulsed with uncertainty, but she nodded. I will do my best. Tommy stepped toward the containment field, carrying a bag of tools that looked primitive compared to the elegant technology surrounding them. He paused at the threshold, took a deep breath, and walked through the shimmering barrier into the quantum field itself. The assembled crowd of aliens held their breath, waiting for him to collapse or disintegrate or suffer any of the dozen fatal outcomes that should have occurred. Instead, Tommy turned around and gave them a thumbs up. Feels tingly, his voice crackled over the radio, but I'm good. Tell me where to start. What followed was a tense 45 minutes of careful work. Velthra directed Tommy to each stabilizer, explaining in the simplest terms she could manage what adjustments needed to be made. Tommy worked with his hands, using tools that seemed absurdly basic, manually adjusting components that were designed to never need manual adjustment. He muttered constantly as he worked, a stream of observations and curses that somehow managed to be both unprofessional and deeply reassuring. Okay, this doohickey here is definitely out of whack. Yep, there's your problem. See this crystal thing? It's vibrating all wrong. Gonna nudge it back. Easy does it. Sarah, remember that thing we did on the Martian colony ship? Same principle. Just got a feel for the resonance. There we go. On the displays outside the containment field, the error cascades began to slow. The quantum waveforms started to align, their phase variance decreasing with each adjustment Tommy made. Velthra's light began to pulse with something that might have been hope, or might have been disbelief that any of this was actually working. Last one, Tommy called out. This is the primary stabilizer, right? The one that synchronizes all the others? Correct, Velthra confirmed. If you can reset its phase alignment, the others should automatically synchronize to match. No pressure then. Tommy positioned himself in front of the primary stabilizer, a complex assembly of crystalline structures and quantum field generators that represented centuries of advanced engineering. He reached into his tool bag and pulled out what looked like a wrench, an actual physical wrench. You're going to adjust quantum field phase alignment with a wrench? Kritik asked, his translator barely capturing the incredulity in his clicking mandibles. It's a really good wrench, Tommy replied. He studied the stabilizer for a long moment, his head tilted to one side like he was listening to something only he could hear. Then he placed the wrench against a specific point on the assembly and gave it a sharp twist. The quantum field shuddered. Every display in the engineering bay went red. Thexnor's heart seized in his chest, certain they just witnessed the death of a brave human and the final failure of their ship. But then the red displays flickered, turned yellow, and suddenly flashed green across the board. The quantum core's energy signature smoothed into a perfect sine wave. The containment field stabilized, and throughout the ship, systems began to restart with a chorus of successful initialization chimes. Tommy emerged from the containment field, his crude device still humming on his chest, a huge grin on his weathered face. Told you it'd work. Velthra's bioluminescence blazed so bright that several crew members had to shield their eyes. That's impossible. You fixed it. You actually fixed it. Years of experience, Tommy said, unstrapping the device. Plus a good ear for when something's not running right. Your power core sounds healthy now. Should be good for a long while, assuming you keep up with the maintenance. Captain Thexanor approached the human mechanic, his forearms spread in the Valorian gesture of profound respect. Mr. Chen, you have saved 53 lives today. You risked your own safety using technology you barely understood to repair a ship that represents engineering principles completely foreign to your own. I don't know how to adequately express my gratitude. Tommy waved a hand dismissively. Just doing the job, Captain. That's what mechanics do. Things break, we fix them. Doesn't matter if it's a car engine or a quantum what's-it. Problem's a problem, solution's a solution. But how did you know it would work? Velthra asked. Your device, the adjustments you made, none of it follows established quantum mechanical principles. It shouldn't have functioned at all. Sarah spoke up, her expression thoughtful. That's because we weren't following quantum mechanical principles. Not exactly. See, human technology evolved differently than yours. We didn't have access to quantum field manipulation early in our development. So we learned to solve problems with classical mechanics, electromagnetism, thermodynamics, things like that. We got really, really good at making do with what we had, at improvising solutions from limited resources. Jim continued the explanation. When we started getting access to more advanced technology, we didn't abandon those old skills. We incorporated them. So yeah, we don't fully understand how your quantum core works at a theoretical level, but we understand resonance, harmonic frequencies, phase alignment, all that fundamental stuff. And we understand that sometimes you gotta just try things and see what works. Plus, Tommy added, we're not afraid to look stupid. If you spend all your time worrying about doing things the proper way, you never find out about the improper ways that might work even better. Over the next several hours, the human mechanics helped the Valorian engineering team run diagnostics and repair secondary systems that had been damaged in the cascade failure. They worked side by side, and Thexnor noticed something remarkable happening. His crew, representatives of species with millennia of spacefaring experience, were learning from these primitive humans. Learning not just technical tricks, but a whole different approach to problem solving. When a backup power relay proved difficult to access because it was behind a sealed bulkhead, the Confederacy engineers began discussing the proper procedure for requesting a maintenance corridor extension, a process that would take hours. Jim simply pulled out a portable cutting torch and made a hole. Fix the wall later, he said. Right now, we need to reach that relay. When a navigation sensor showed inconsistent readings, and Velthra began calculating the precise molecular adjustments needed to recalibrate it, Sarah suggested just replacing it with a spare. Sometimes the fastest fix is the simplest one. Not everything needs to be perfect, just functional. And when Tommy noticed the ship's medical bay had a peculiar vibration that nobody else had detected, he tracked it down to a loose mounting bracket and secured it with what he called good old-fashioned duct tape, a material that Thexanor learned was apparently considered nearly sacred among human engineers, despite being nothing more than adhesive fabric. It's not elegant, Dr. Nixar observed, watching Tommy apply the primitive bonding material. Nope, Tommy agreed, but it works, it's fast, and it'll hold until you can do a proper repair. That's all that matters. By the time the repairs were complete, 18 hours after the human mechanics had arrived, the Valorian star was running better than it had in months. Systems that had been showing minor inefficiencies were now operating at peak performance, thanks to the humans' pragmatic approach to maintenance. The ship's AI had restarted successfully and was actually running faster than before, after Jim made some adjustments to its processing cores that he described as clearing out the clutter. You basically defragmented our quantum computer, Velthra said, her light pulsing with amazed realization. That's not supposed to be necessary, or even possible. Everything needs a tune-up now and then, Jim replied, even fancy AI brains. As the human mechanics prepared to return to their own ship, Captain Thexanor assembled the entire crew in the main hangar bay. It was unprecedented, this formal gathering for a departure, but then again, everything about this situation had been unprecedented. "Mr. Chen, Ms. Rodriguez, Mr. Patterson," Thexanor began, his voice carrying through the bay. "You came to our aid when we were stranded and dying. You succeeded where our own engineers, trained in the most advanced techniques known to the Confederacy, had failed. You did so with primitive tools, improvised solutions, and a level of creativity that defies conventional understanding. On behalf of my crew in the Valorian Confederacy, I thank you." Tommy looked uncomfortable with the formality. "Like I said, Captain, just doing our job." "No," Thexanor said firmly. "It was far more than that. You've taught us something important today. We've spent so long perfecting our technology, making it more elegant and efficient, that we've forgotten the value of simple, practical solutions. We've become dependent on our systems working perfectly and lost the ability to make them work imperfectly when necessary." He gestured to his crew. "Every person here has learned something from watching you work. Not just technical skills, but an approach to problems that we'd forgotten was possible. The willingness to try unconventional solutions. The courage to risk looking foolish. The understanding that functional is more important than perfect." Velthra stepped forward, her crystalline form glowing with warm colors. "I've been an engineer for 30 cycles, and I thought I understood the principles of starship repair. But today I learned that knowing the theory isn't the same as solving the problem. Sometimes you need someone who doesn't know what's impossible so they can do it anyway." Other crew members added their own thanks, sharing stories of what they'd observed and learned. The Chitter navigators talked about the humans' ability to improvise when instruments failed. The Mindari doctors discussed the creative first aid techniques they'd witnessed. Even the ship's AI contributed, its synthesized voice expressing fascination with the illogical yet effective approach to troubleshooting that the humans had demonstrated. Finally, Tommy raised his hands for quiet. Okay, you're gonna make us blush. But since we're getting all sentimental here, let me say this. You folks, you've got technology that's literally beyond our wildest dreams. Your worst ships are better than our best ones. Your basic tools are more advanced than our most sophisticated instruments. You're smarter, more educated, more experienced than we'll probably ever be." He paused, making sure he had everyone's attention. "But you know what you need to remember? Smart isn't the same as wise. Advanced isn't the same as effective. And sometimes the best solution is the one that just barely works, held together with hope and ingenuity, and maybe a little bit of that duct tape I keep talking about." Sarah added, "We learned a lot from you today too. Seeing your technology, understanding your approaches, it's opened our eyes to possibilities we never imagined. We're going to take that knowledge back with us, share it with other humans, and use it to improve our own systems. That's how progress happens, right? Different people, different species, sharing what they know and learning from each other." "Even if one side is way behind the other?" Kritik asked. "Especially then," Jim said, "because sometimes the person who's behind sees things from a different angle. Fresh perspective, you know? We didn't fix your ship in spite of being less advanced. We fixed it because we're less advanced. We're still used to things breaking and having to figure out creative ways to fix them." The goodbyes took another hour. Crew members wanted to exchange contact information, to stay in touch with these remarkable humans who had saved their lives. Tommy found himself promising to send Velthra some readings on classical mechanics, while Sarah agreed to collaborate with the ship's science officer on a paper about improvised quantum field manipulation. Jim was invited to visit the Confederacy's main engineering academy to give a lecture on creative problem-solving. Finally, the three humans stood in the airlock, ready to cycle through. Tommy turned back one last time. "Captain, one more thing. Get your people to check those mounting brackets in the medical bay quarterly. That vibration I fixed? It'll come back if you don't stay on top of it. and maybe run a diagnostic on your environmental systems every month instead of every quarter. I noticed some slight variations that your instruments probably miss. Prevention's easier than repair. We will, Thexnor promised. And Captain Chen? I'm not a captain, I'm just a mechanic. You'll always be captain to us, Thexnor said. Safe travels, and may the stars guide your path. The humans left, and the airlock sealed behind them. Through the viewport, Thexnor watched as they made their way back to the Rusty Bucket, that ungainly freight hauler that had delivered such precious cargo. The human ship separated from the Valorian star with those irregular thruster bursts, turning away toward its original destination. Helm, Thexnor said, set course for the diplomatic station. It's time we completed our mission. Course laid in, Captain. Core power is stable at 98%, all systems optimal. Engage. As the Valorian star jumped to faster-than-light travel, Thexnor remained on the bridge, thinking about the day's events. He'd sent a full report to Confederacy Command, including detailed descriptions of the human techniques and the unconventional repairs. He suspected it would generate significant debate among the leadership. Some would dismiss the humans' methods as crude and unreliable. Others might see, as he did, the value in their approach. Captain, Velthra said, approaching his command chair, I've been analyzing the humans' improvised field damper. I still can't fully explain why it works, but I've identified some principles that might be applicable to other systems. With your permission, I'd like to begin experimenting with similar approaches. Granted, in fact, I want you to share your findings with the entire engineering division. It's time we remember that there's more than one way to solve a problem. Sir, that might not be well received by the senior engineers. The humans' methods directly contradict established protocols. Thexnor's auxiliary eyes focused on his chief engineer. Then perhaps it's time to question some of our protocols. We've become so invested in doing things the right way that we've forgotten to ask if the right way is actually the best way. Over the following days, as the Valorian star continued its journey, word of the human mechanics spread throughout the ship. It became a popular topic of conversation in the mess halls and recreation areas. The security footage of Tommy working inside the quantum field, casually adjusting systems that should have killed him instantly, was watched repeatedly. His final twist of that wrench, the moment when he fixed the supposedly unfixable problem, became almost legendary. But more than the spectacle, it was the philosophy that resonated with the crew. Different departments began adopting what they called the human approach to various challenges. When a problem seemed intractable, someone would invariably ask, what would the humans do? It became a way of giving themselves permission to think differently, to try unconventional solutions. Dr. Nixara found that human approach thinking helped with diagnostic challenges, looking for simple explanations before complex ones. The navigation team discovered that sometimes manual control produced better results than algorithmic precision. Even the diplomatic corps began applying the lessons, approaching negotiations with more flexibility and creativity. The story spread beyond the Valorian star. Thexnor's report generated exactly the debate he'd anticipated, but also genuine interest. Other ships that had encountered human vessels began sharing their own stories. A pattern emerged. Humans were resourceful, creative, and remarkably effective despite their technological limitations. They approached problems with a pragmatism that more advanced species had lost. Within weeks, Confederacy engineering schools began incorporating improvised solution scenarios into their training. The goal wasn't to make their engineers less sophisticated, but to make them more adaptable. To teach them that knowing the perfect solution was useless if you couldn't implement it, and that an imperfect solution that worked was better than a perfect solution that didn't. 6 months later, Thexnor received a message. It was from Tommy Chen, sent from somewhere deep in human space. The message was simple. Captain, hope your ship's still running smooth. We're doing good out here, carrying freight and fixing things that break. Ran into another Confederacy vessel last week, helped them with a sensor problem. They didn't seem as surprised as you folks were. Guess word's getting around that humans are okay at this mechanic stuff. Stay safe out there, and remember, when something breaks, don't overthink it. Sometimes you just need a good wrench and the willingness to try. Tommy. Attached to the message was a data file containing schematics for the improvised field damper, annotated with detailed explanations of the theoretical principles behind its design. Tommy had spent months working with human scientists to understand why his invention worked, translating practical knowledge into theoretical framework. It was a gift shared freely with no expectation of payment or recognition. Thexnor forwarded the schematics to Velthra and to Confederacy Engineering Command. He also composed a response. Tommy, the ship runs perfectly, your repairs have held without issue, and your advice about preventive maintenance has proven invaluable. Your schematics will be studied by engineers across the Confederacy. You've contributed more to our understanding than you realize. The universe is better because there are people like you in it, willing to help strangers with nothing more than skill and goodwill. If you're ever in our sector again, the Valorian Star will always welcome you aboard. Safe travels, my friend. May your wrenches be strong and your duct tape plentiful. Captain Thexner. He sent the message and returned to his duties, commanding a ship that ran better than it had in years, thanks to the human touch. Outside the viewport, stars streaked past as they traveled faster than light, crossing distances that would have been impossible just a few generations ago for any species. It was technology that inspired awe, systems so complex and sophisticated that they bordered on miraculous. But if those systems ever failed again, Thexner knew exactly who he'd call for help. Not because humans had the best technology, or the most advanced training, or the deepest understanding of quantum mechanics, but because they had something perhaps more valuable: the practical wisdom to fix what was broken, the creativity to improvise solutions from limited resources, and the courage to try things that shouldn't work but somehow did. In the end, that was the real lesson the humans had taught. Advanced technology was wonderful, but it was no substitute for ingenuity. Knowledge was valuable, but it was incomplete without the wisdom to apply it practically. And sometimes when faced with an impossible problem, what you needed wasn't a more sophisticated solution. Sometimes you just needed a really good wrench, a willingness to try, and the kind of determination that said, "This is broken, and I'm going to fix it, even if I have to invent a whole new way to do it." That was the human way, and the galaxy, Thexner reflected, was better for it.